All right. So I hope everybody has the opportunity to come in. Uh, I guess the majority of the list of the people have now switched on. Yeah. So let's give it a go. All right. Welcome everyone, and thank you for taking the time in your busy schedules to join our Safety Masterclass today. And we'll be covering something incredibly important, that is how the BFM fitting system can help protect people and your product in your plant. And I see we have people from all different occupations and industries. And yeah, safety is something that is vital to all of us. And I'd like to acknowledge our fantastic distributors who are supporting BFM here in bringing attention to this discussion. We have now and then a pop-up screen that is showing in your screens, and we would like you to fill it out. It's a pool for us, so that will be good if you can do that. So we'll be hearing today from several members of the BFM team, and we have the pleasure of BFM CEO and founder Blair McPhee joining us to take your questions during the questions and answer session. And our technical lead, Matthew Bailey, who people may have seen from our tech expert and product demonstration videos. He will be presenting throughout the webinar. And for those of you who don't know me, let me just introduce myself. I'm Hans Assink. I'm BFM Business Development Manager for Northern Europe. And we will be also joined by Claudio Pavanelli for the questions and answers session at the end. And Claudio is our Business Development Manager for Southern Europe. So just to give you a little background on the BFM fitting system for those who are not familiar completely with it, it was invented in 2006, and since then BFM has quickly become the industry standard for connectors. It's fully manufactured in New Zealand, and BFM is used by plants across the world, serviced from over 54 distributors globally and in 77 plus countries. As our customer base has expanded, BFM has continued to add more innovative products to its catalog, with over 20 products today. And to just give you an idea of the customers that we have here, we have so many global customers. It's not surprised that the BFM fitting system is used by so many across the world, and spanning industries from food and pharma to chemicals and minerals. So today we're going to talk about how the BFM fitting system can help protect your people, product in your plant, along with a few case studies. And then we will take some time to answer any of your questions in the questions and answers at the end. Please note that your questions should be submitted in the Q&A function only. This is viewable only by the presenter and the speakers. And this webinar is going to be recorded and will be available, including a PDF version of the presentation. Then, without further ado, I would like to turn the presentation over to our technical lead, Matthew Bailey.
Yeah, thanks, Hans, and thanks to everybody who's joined us from all over the world. You know, it's great to have so many people here who are interested in protecting their plants and their people by using the BFM system. So I thought I would start off with a little bit of information on what the BFM fitting system is and what it replaces. So essentially, the BFM fitting system's been developed to replace the incumbent old-style clamp connectors. Things like you see here, you know, they're inefficient, unhygienic, and quite frankly, they're unsafe. So the BFM fitting solves the problems associated with these traditional clamp type systems. And it does that by using two spigots and a flexible connector that snap in and give you the perfect fit every time. And that leads to a cleaner, safer, and more efficient plant. So first of all, we're going to start talking about protecting your people and how you do that with a BFM fitting. As we all know, our people are the lifeblood of our businesses. They're the ones who work day in, day out to produce all of the wonderful things that we make. And it's incredibly important to prevent workplace injury. Workplace injuries can lead to low morale, downtime, and that leads to low productivity in your plants, not to mention the costs associated to your business as a result of things like personal injury claims. So we're going to go through 5 steps of what we call the BFM safety pyramid. So we're going to start off by talking about how our standard connectors can fix some of the problems associated with dust leakage by eliminating dust in your plant, and also by removing the use of tools in your plant to prevent things like hand injuries when installing flexible connectors. So dust leakage can be a major problem in your plants. It's often not experienced for many years, but repeated exposure to fine dust, even in industries with powders that might generally be considered safe. So it can create issues over time that, after a few years start to lead to things like pulmonary illness. So it's really important that we focus on reducing the amount of dust in our plants, not just to reduce explosion risk, but also to help prevent some of that worker injury. So here are some images from some of the plants that we've been to before installing BFM connectors. And as you can see, there's dust all over the place coming out of these clamp type connectors. So, not only are these tripping hazards and explosion hazards, but they're also hazards to breathe. If you're around this much dust constantly, it's a real risk to your lungs. So the BFM fitting uses an internal snap fit to eliminate dust leakage. So by using the 2 spigots in the connector snaps into place and seals from the inside. What that means is that if there's ever any pressure inside your pipework, the cuffs push out tighter against the spigot and form a tighter seal. So you never have to experience dust leakage within your plant. This video that we're going to show shows the difference here between a clamp type connector and a BFM fitting. So as you can see, the connector on the right, as soon as pressure is added, the dust in there is forced out of the connector and out into the atmosphere. But with the BFM fitting, that dust is contained, and it gives a much better seal for your plant. It'll keep the place tidier, and it'll also reduce the risk to your workers. BFMs can also be used to reduce the risk of hand injuries in your plant. For example, if you have connectors that are in difficult to install positions and you need to use tools to do them, there's a risk of pinch point injuries on people's hands, and there's also the risk of slipping with tools and injuring your hands as well. So standard BFM connectors just use a snap fit fitting system, so you can install it by hand in about 20 seconds. If you take a look at this video, you'll see just how quick and easy it is. So just like that, in under 20 seconds, you can safely take out and install a new connector without any kind of risk of hand injury in your plant. One of the other things is you need to limit access to dangerous locations around your flexible connectors. Traditional clamp type systems don't allow for the restriction of access into a lot of these dangerous pieces of equipment. And so that can lead to things like amputation and crush injuries from things like rotary knives, rotary valves, or mills in your plant. So BFM has a number of options that can be used to prevent access to these locations. We'll start off by talking about the standard tool release system. So what a tool release connector is it's a connector with a much firmer band. The connector can still be installed by hand, but once the snap ring snaps into place, you can't remove it by hand. So it allows for easy installation, but it doesn't allow for easy removal. All of our tool release connectors are marked with a white dot so that you can identify them. And we also offer tools which you can use to remove them. So a standard tool release connector uses a 6mm hole in the top of the spigot, and that can be used to push the tool release tool in to push in the cuff, and that allows you to safely remove the connector. So having these special tools allows more control to the supervisors and managers of the plant to reduce access into these dangerous locations until people really need to get in there. And along that same line, we've developed what we call a Smiley face tool release system. So essentially this works by having a unique shape and a unique key that doesn't match anything else in your toolbox. So you have to have the Smiley face tool release tool to access that location. And that means that if you don't want anyone to go in there, you can lock this key away somewhere else in the plant with the supervisor, with the manager, so that people can only access these dangerous locations by using the correct tool at the right time. These smiley face holes can be retrofitted onto existing spigots in your plant. So if you want to increase the safety level in a certain area, we offer a punch tool which can be used to punch these holes. And that just means you don't have to have any drilling or hot work or any of that kind of stuff around. And the little slug that gets punched out is also caught in the tool. So these can be really easily retrofitted into systems to really help increase the safety level around different parts of your plant. We've also developed recently what we call a TR lockout safety system. So essentially this adds another level of safety to the TR system. So basically this oval shaped tube gets welded around the tool release hole, and then you can use a padlock or a bolt lock or another kind of locking system that can be secured either by code or key to really prevent anybody from getting into these locations. So this just adds another level of control on top of the already strong tool release system. We also offer a pneumatic monitoring system. And how this works is the pneumatic monitoring system takes some air from a regulator at about 30 kilopascals. That's pumped into the cuff area of your connector, and it forms a small air bead around the cuff. And what that means is that anytime the cuff is removed anywhere around the connector, a pressure wave hits that pressure sensor, and the pressure sensor can then deliver a signal that might say to shut down the equipment. It might trigger an alarm, or it might alert a supervisor that one of the connectors isn't in place and maybe you should check it out and see what's going on. Now, a lot of people also use these systems to determine after a wash of the plant that all of the connectors have been returned to place correctly. This little video will demonstrate exactly how it works. So as you can see, anywhere around the connector that you snap it out, it triggers the pressure switch, and then that pressure switch can be used to send a signal somewhere else in the plant to a PLC or a controller or the supervisor and let them know something's going on. So now we're going to talk about protecting your product. So as we all know, product recalls as a result of poor hygiene in plants can cost a lot of money. And it's not just the money factor. There's also reputational damage that occurs as a result of product recalls due to hygiene in the plant. So clamp type connectors, they have internal crevices. So between the connector material and the pipework, there's often an area for product to catch. And what happens when that product can catch in those spaces is that bacteria can begin to form, especially in the heated temperatures that are in a lot of these food processing plants. So if that happens, once some of that product maybe contacts some of your good product or falls into the product stream, it can contaminate entire batches further down the process. So the BFM fitting system eliminates that by using a creviceless design. So all angles in the product are designed for drainage, and you can use these in CIP as well as COP applications, to keep your plant clean. They also prevent contaminants from being sucked in under vacuum. So if you have a vacuum in the plant across old style clamp connectors, you'll often notice pressure drop. And everywhere there's a pressure drop in the plant, as a result of that, something is being pulled into the connector. So if you have air that is contaminated or has dust or something else in the plant, it can get pulled in under vacuum into your system. So by using a tool release BFM in a vacuum situation, you create an airtight seal, which prevents anything from being sucked in and contaminating your product. And if you have very high hygiene products, this is incredibly important to protect the integrity of what you're producing. BFMs are also an ideal option for using with metal detectors. So if you're using metal detectors, we have a few different options that you can use with them. Often people use plastic rings to hold the connector aperture wide open and allow their product to flow smoothly through the metal detector. And that allows you to get a good read of what if there is any metal content in there. We also offer what is a quick access port. This is primarily used for using test balls with metal detectors. And what it does is it minimizes the opening and minimizes the chance for contamination when you need to insert those test balls. So you simply open the port. It's a very small port. You can either take samples through it or you can put your test balls through it. And yeah, it just minimizes that contact with the outside environment and the outside air for your plant. So instead of having a big open hatch somewhere in the plant where you have to insert these test balls, you can just use a small port on your connector. And it also prevents you from having to take the whole connector out to do that. So you keep more of your product in and less of the outside air gets in as well. BFM also spends a lot of time working on our global food safety compliance. So as you can see here, we've worked very hard to achieve FDA, USDA, 3A, EC, ATEX, Halal, and kosher certification. And most recently, we've also added Chinese certification as well. So, we are truly a connector that can be used globally, in all kinds of food safety areas. So that's why some of these multinationals that you'll see here have specified BFMs for use all over the world. We also want to talk about protecting your plant. So this one also covers worker safety as well, because protecting your plant keeps your people safe. With clamp style connectors, there is a huge risk of secondary explosion. If you have an explosion inside your plant, clamp style connectors are usually the first thing to fail. And what happens there is that fire and that hot gas is released into the plant, and the shake from the explosion can aerosolize any kind of dust around your plant. And when that fire and hot gas contacts it, it can lead to a huge secondary explosion, which, as you can see from these images, can have the ability to level an entire plant. So it's really important to minimize that risk. BFM fittings have been independently explosion tested. So as you'll see here, when the bomb is let off inside the connector, you can see that it contains the explosion. It seals tighter under pressure in the cuff area to prevent any of that fire or hot gas from escaping into the plant. And that's a really effective way to minimize the risk of a secondary explosion. BFM also offers Kevlar covers, and the reason for using a Kevlar cover is they offer extra pressure resistance, but they also prevent any kind of fire that develops in your system from spreading. And there's a few reasons you might need that. If you need to wait for a dousing system to activate and put out that fire, or you need somebody in the plant to respond to eliminate the fire, then having a Kevlar cover in place can stop that fire from spreading to outside of the connector into other areas of the plant. And that also minimizes that secondary explosion risk. BFMs are also made from static dissipative materials. So standard connectors are often made of things like silicon. Silicon is not a dissipative material, it's insulative. And what that can mean is that a charge can build up in the connector and it can lead to sparking. And any kind of spark inside your product stream can lead to a risk of explosion because the powder inside is often aerosolized. There's small fine particles floating around. If those can ignite, then you have the risk of an explosion. So using a BFM fitting often means using a dissipative connector. And what that means is that charge that's generated by the powder flow can safely dissipate into the connector, into the spigots and away to the ground, keeping your plant electrostatically safe. So as you can see here, the range of connectors that we have that are in this dissipative range, we have a lot of connectors there. From our standard Seeflex, which has a surface resistivity of 10 to the 10 ohms, down to our Teflex NP Black, which has a small carbon black additive in it to make it very dissipative. So if you have a very high ESD risk in your plant, you might want to use something like a Teflex NP Black, and that just allows that charge to kind of dissipate very safely. So as I kind of mentioned, you don't want to use an insulative material because that can allow charge to build up in the plant, but you also don't necessarily want to use very low conductive materials either, because when that happens, you can't predict how the electrostatic discharge is going to happen, if it's going to occur safely or not. So you really want to select a dissipative material that can dissipate the electrical charge in a safe and controlled manner. So one of the questions we often get asked is, do you still need earthing cables when using your dissipative connectors? And the answer to that is yes. If you have an electrical fault somewhere in your plant, or one piece of your equipment no longer is connected to earth, you need to use an earthing cable to prevent that charge from jumping across the connector. So essentially, using an earthing cable gives that electrical fault or electrical charge a safe place to travel across the connector and away to the ground, at another piece of equipment that's still maintaining its ground connection. BFM also makes all of our connectors tested to ATEX requirements. So on our website, we have a lot of information about ATEX requirements and a declaration of conformity. And that's got a whole lot of information, that's very useful if you're selecting the right kind of connector for your ATEX environment. Some of our customers also do what you see here in this double layer connector. So when you have an ATEX environment around a connector, it often spreads further than just around the connector, and it can absorb, parts of the room. So you need to upgrade your electrical equipment. Some of the ways to eliminate the costs of that electrical equipment is to contain the ATEX zone. So by adding a second connector on the outside, you add a fail-safe if the initial connector fails, and you reduce the ATEX zone around your connector from being, a few meters around the connector to just being that small space in between the two connectors. We're going to quickly go over a few case studies here before we get to our Q&A. So this plant, during an upgrade, they wanted to switch away from using old style connectors so that their staff would no longer have to wear masks. So as you can see, the difference between the photo on the left and the photo on the right is huge. Previously there'd be a lot of the soy dust around the plant, and that was toxic to the workers. They'd have to wear masks at all times when they were in the production area. After switching to BFMs, they no longer had that dust in the plant, and it just made the whole area a lot safer for their workers. This milk powder producer, similarly, they switched to using BFM fittings for a number of reasons, including increasing the hygiene of their plant and their product, keeping the plant clean. But they also did it because they have some of these connectors that are in difficult to install positions, and they wanted to remove the tooled aspects, so they don't have to use screwdrivers or any of those kind of tools to install and get their connectors into place. Axo Nobel here in the Netherlands also reduced their explosion risk by switching from a clamp type silicon connector to using a BFM fitting. So they moved away from using what is a insulative material to using a dissipative material, and they also increased the dust containment in their plant to reduce their explosion risk. So now I'd like to hand over to Claudio for our Q&A, and Blair and I will be happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thanks, Matthew. I'm sure many of you have a question for BFM team, and I see some questions that are already popping up. And please write your question in the Q&A section only. So we can start with the first one. Is a coupler used in magnetic flux help generate sparks? Matthew?
Sorry, I had myself on mute. Sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand the question there.
Yeah, Blair.
Read the question again, please, Claudia.
Is a coupler used in magnetic flux will help generating sparks?
I think that question's in relation to it being used in perhaps magnets, or in a magnet type situation where they're using magnets to test to make sure that the product falling through doesn't have any metal in it, i.e. metal detectors. No, the answer is no. The BFM's perfect for those applications if that's what the person's referring to. I think O4OE is most of the time is a perfect material. Not only is it clear, but it is also static dissipative anyway, as mentioned before. So I think that'd be perfect for that application. Yeah.
Okay, so the second one, are there more hygienic options for the double layer protection BFM setups?
Matt? Is that referring to the double layer ATEX setup? Well, that setup uses a hygienic BFM connector. So, I mean, our connectors are all hygienically designed. That's how we achieved our 3A certification, as well as our EC food certification. So using a 2-layer BFM setup, it's still just as hygienic as using a single layer as well.
Yeah.
Okay, another one. Any possibility for low temperature application? New airtight materials that can stand below 40 degrees Celsius. We have been using Seeflex 040 AS and Seeflex 040 in different applications, but they tend to be quite fragile in low temperature.
Yeah, one of the connectors that you could try would be our Seeflex NP. So being made from PTFE, that can be a little bit more flexible when it comes to those low temperature applications. It depends if you have movement as well. If you do have a little bit of movement, Seeflex is probably still going to be the best, even if they do tend to get a little bit fragile. But if you have a static application that gets quite cold, you could use a Seeflex NP connector there.
We also have the LM3 material, which is used very commonly in the likes of the coffee applications where they're extremely low temperatures, and they've been run down as low as -60 degrees C. That's by using the LM3. So we do have options of lower temperatures. The trick with the very low temperatures is to contact your distributor, because once we know more about the actual individual application, we can give you better advice as to which material to use. Yeah.
Okay, then we have another one. Do you have any solution for DN80 diameter?
80 diameter. This is definitely one that we do get asked about a little bit, whether or not we can manufacture smaller spigots, and it is something that we do look into doing, and at the moment we don't offer that. But it is something that's certainly been called for by people. So it is something that in the future we will review.
Yeah, we are currently working on that now, but it's a little way off. But yeah.
Okay, then we have many questions. What are some further inventions that you are working on at the moment? I don't know if we can answer to this, but Blair, maybe you can.
I can answer a couple of them that are kind of close to being released, I suppose. One of the things that we've been working on for a while is a sort of a tag machine, which we're going to use with some of our distributors so that they can help people add things like allergen labels to their connectors. So that's not exactly something that end users would be using, but we'll offer that to our distributors so they can help out our customers there. We're also making some changes to the bulk bag loader to make it more hygienic so that it can be used in all kinds of dairy applications, including very high hygiene ones. So, those are a couple of things that are, right at the cusp of being finished and released.
Yeah. Okay. Is it possible to get step files of the Spigot and Seeflex? It makes it easier for plan design.
Yep. So all step files are available for our spigots, and if there's any connectors that aren't available on our website drawing page, you can request them from your distributor, and we can provide drawings of all of our connectors and spigots to you as needed.
Okay, then we have 4-inch spigots at the moment, and when installing, sometimes we struggle to get the BFM fitting to spring out to form the seal. What do you advise?
Yeah, sometimes that can be a little bit to do with the installation technique. So I think there's a really good video on our website of showing how to install some of these connectors. And the trick is to, once it's seated into place, to snap around the outside a few times, click the band in and just move around, and just do that a few times around the outside, just to relieve any of the catching that the Seeflex is doing against the spigot. And once you've clicked around it a few times, that should pop back into place and it should form that seal properly.
Okay. How can you fulfill the machinery safety requirements with your system? In some cases, if there is the possibility to reach moving parts, you must have a connection safely fixed and not removable by hands.
Yeah, so that's obviously one of the reasons that we have our tool release connectors. I know in some applications there's actually a higher requirement that means that you know, you might need to have some kind of cover over the outside of the connector. So in some of those applications, you know, you can put a Kevlar cover over the outside of the connector and use something like a nylock nut to secure it, as opposed to a butterfly nut, which we usually supply. And those nylock nuts, once they're tightened on, you can't remove them by hand. So that means that if somebody does need to get into it, they can't cut the connector or anything. There is a Kevlar cover in there that's going to prevent any kind of cutting or access into that connector area, you know, unless you have the tools to remove it.
Okay. Do you already have customer that use BFM in wet application, for example, slurry processing? I can imagine that the BFM system could be used on those too.
Yeah, so the BFM system's used a lot in processing of slurries and pastes. One of the things to consider when you're processing something like a slurry is that you know, the higher the viscosity of the material, the less likely it is to kind of you know, have any issues. So if you're processing, you know, yeah, slurry or a paste, then BFM should form a perfect seal with those.
Yep.
Okay. Do you plan to update the BFM app with tapered options, corner connector, breather bags, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I guess the advice with tapered connectors is to always use the BFM app with the larger size diameter to get the correct installation gap. So you always want to consider what the largest diameter is in order to get the correct information there. As for breather bags, they don't really have an installation gap requirement. You know, you might want to use a cage if you have a large breather bag, but other than that, if the breather bag is freestanding, then there's no installation gap requirement there. We do also have a corner connector calculator on our website, which is used for sizing the corner connectors. And once you know those dimensions, you know, from that corner connector calculator, you should be able to determine the exact position where those spigots need to be installed.
Yep.
Shall we use the lip spigot for vibration application? If so, can we eliminate the leakages?
Yep, you can use lip spigots for vibration applications. If you want to eliminate leakages when using a lip spigot on those applications, then you'll need to use a gasket around the lip. So if you're using something like a Jacobs tube, they offer specific gaskets for their pipework, which can be fitted over the spigot. And then when the clamp is tightened over the outside, that forms a very tight seal around that gasket between the pipework and the lip spigot.
What about a cage to protect the connector?
Yep, some people do install cages around the connectors to protect them. You know, often that's done at a plant level because, as you know, every kind of plant has different safety requirements. So, you know, you have things like cages for explosion protection, but you also have cages that are designed to prevent people from, you know, putting their fingers through or touching the connector. So cages are often a good idea because they can be fixed to the spigot head. So the little ridges that you see in the spigot can be used to secure a plate, or something can tighten into there to secure a cage around the connector very easily.
Yeah, just an add there. One thing that we do notice around the world is that different plants have different regulations, even within the same company. So, you know, we've gone to a lot of trouble, as you can see from our pyramid, making it safer and safer by using different mechanisms from tool release all the way to the pneumatic safety device. But there are sometimes plants will actually want further and more information about that in relation to cages. So individually, plant by plant, it needs to be looked at based on individual plants. Yeah.
Next one, please advise tapered connector oscillation limitation.
Yeah, so tapered connectors, the oscillation limit, it really depends on the size and the length. Obviously, the longer the connector, the more it can oscillate. So it's really important to kind of assess those on a case-by-case basis. If you have a specific application you're asking about, get in touch with us or get in touch with your distributor, and then we can look at it individually and make a recommendation based on that information.
Okay, another one. Do you have EU VO 1935 2006 and EU 10 2011?
Yep. So basically, all of our materials are certified to 1935 2006 and 10/2011. So we've gone through a lot of trouble to do all the testing on our materials to make sure that they meet those requirements. If you go on our website under the product pages, there should be access to download that information. And if you can't find it there, feel free to get in touch with either us or your distributor, and we can share those declarations for each of the materials with you.
Okay. Any other question? Not so far. Maybe. Oh, wow. Okay. Is it possible 060S to use in 2.5 bar pressure?
Yes, it will depend on the size. So obviously, the smaller the connector, the shorter and the smaller diameter, the higher pressure it can be used for. So if you want to use something at 2 bar pressure around that size, it would have to be incredibly small. You'd be using a 100 millimeter diameter that's maybe 80 millimeters long. So it really depends on the size.
Okay. Is it possible if customer want to combine BFM connector with the snap lock? The concern is to avoid much downtime of process.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm not quite sure what that question means. Snap.
Is snap lock perhaps something like a lipped kind of pipe work so that you can snap it into place and then connect it?
Yeah. Similar to a lip system, I think, Matt.
Yeah. In which case, you can adjust the spigots if you need to work with a system like that. If there's an adapter that you have, you can weld that onto a spigot. Or if it works with something like our lipped spigot, then that can work as well.
Yeah. The tails that we have on the stainless steel spigots that we sell can be cut shorter or made longer or flared or done whatever it is to fit a snap lock type system if that's what they need to do. No problem. Yeah.
Would the BFM fitting with the release device be better to snap out into the 4-inch spigot?
Yeah, a tool release connector. You could use a tool release connector just to give it that little bit of extra force to make it a little bit easier. If you don't want to go around the outside and do that snapping and pushing into the band to get it to fit, using a tool release connector will just give it a little bit of extra force, which can help it pop itself out and pop itself back into place.
As Matt said before, I definitely suggest that you watch the technique video we have online to show you exactly how to do that, where you put it in more than once, because the BFMs will always snap out. So it might be worth watching that video, as Matt mentioned before. Yeah.
No more question. I don't see any other questions, so I think that's a good place to wrap up. We hope that the webinar has been informative for everyone attending. Once again, the recording of the webinar will be available later along with the PDF version of the presentation itself. We will also have a translation into Spanish, Italian, German, and French. If you would like to keep up with our latest update, we encourage you to follow us on our social media. You can find a lot of insightful videos on our YouTube channel, while our LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter have important news, tips, and articles. After the webinar, you will also receive an email from BFM, which will include the contact details for myself, Hans, our BDM for Asia and America. That you can get in touch with us. I also would like to again to acknowledge our wonderful distributor network. So network who are here tonight, this morning actually, and whom you can contact for expert tailored advice, and you can find the details on our BFM website. We are always super happy to chat, so please don't hesitate to reach out with BFM. A big thank you to Matthew for presenting so much useful information, and Blair for his feedback. And of course, thank you everyone for attending, and let's stay connected, no pun intended. Thank you very much, and see you next time.